So Coastal Cabana has been popping up everywhere, and I'm sure some of you have been wondering the same thing as I did. Is this just another EC, or is this actually something different for Pasir Ris? This beachfront resort vibe actually caught my eye straight away. You don't really get an EC that feels like a holiday home, but visuals aside, right, I wanted to dig into the bigger question. Is there value here? Will the entry price make sense for upgraders? And who is this project really built for? So before we actually get into the Coastal Cabana, we really need to talk about why ECs are moving so fast. Because every launch, right, same story, queues, strong ballot, popular stacks are gone in a weekend, and it's not hype. It's simply one of the last ways to enter the private market at a price that still feels reasonable. You get condo facilities, lifestyle, and after MOP, it becomes a full-fledged condo. For many families, it becomes the most logical upgrade path. But here's the key question, right? Is this something you can actually go for? Are you eligible? And if you are, right, does Coastal Cabana fit your situation? Let's break all of that down and see whether this could be your window of opportunity. So before we dive in, right, a quick reminder, I would like to ask that you like and subscribe to the channel. It will really encourage me to push out more valuable content. And if you want early updates, bounce out units, and time-sensitive information that I usually don't post anywhere else, you can join my Telegram channel. Just scan the QR code, or you can drop me a WhatsApp if you have a personal question. So ECs in the East are really not common. We really rarely get to see new ECs on this side of Singapore. And the interesting thing is that we are getting two back-to-back. So Coastal Cabana is actually previewing on 6th of December this year, and Rivelle of Tampines is expected to launch around Feb or March next year. And total, we have about 1,308 units of EC. And that's for the East. This is your window now. Because once this two is gone, right, there isn't another Eastern EC that is lined up anytime soon. Again, Coastal Cabana, it will run from 6th to 21st December, and the actual booking day will be on 17 January 2026. Now for ECs, right, usually the first day booking comes with a quota, and second timers are capped at 30% of the total units. So once that quota is filled, right, any remaining second timers will definitely have to wait an extra 1 month before they can buy. But Coastal Cabana is doing things a little bit differently. They will be using the HDB balloting system, which means that both first timers and second timers will get to book on the same day. So nobody gets pushed to a later round. Everybody will get to buy a unit on booking day. So let's talk about why ECs is such a big draw for Singaporeans. Even with today's prices, demand for EC has not really slowed down. And in fact, every launch still sees strong take-up rate. And the core reason is the entry price gap. Because when you compare an EC to a private condo in the same area, right, the difference in entry price is still very meaningful. You are essentially buying at a subsidized private price, but enjoying the same facilities, same lifestyle, and eventually it becomes a full-fledged condo after MOP. So for many families, right, this gap is what creates the opportunity. You start lower, which means that you naturally have more room for appreciation, and when it transits into the private market, right, and this is why ECs continue to be such a popular asset class, because there's lower barrier to entry, strong value support, and also a clear path towards longer capital appreciation. And when we zoom in at the 3-bedroom segment, right, in the OCR region, the average price gap between the new launch 3-bedders and the new ECs is actually about 856,000. So from the start, right, an EC buyer entering at almost $800,000 cheaper than someone buying a similar private unit. So now you actually picture this. If a private condo owner actually enters at 2.3 million, right, in the future, they need to exit about 2.8 million or thereabouts to actually see a meaningful gain. And that will be dependent on how the market moves. However, if you are an EC buyer today and you enter at, say, 1.6 million, your eventual exit price, right, definitely sits within a range that is already proven and accepted in the OCR private market. And what I mean is that if, let's say, you buy at 1.6 million, you can quite easily exit at 2.2 million because this price has already been accepted. You are selling into a demand pool that is already used to paying this kind of numbers. And that is the key advantage to the EC path. You actually start on a lower per square foot price, which naturally gives you the better pricing support and smoother route when it comes to the resale. So here's the quick overview comparison between the OCR resale private condos and OCR resale ECs. And when we actually look at the numbers, right, I think something stands out quite clearly. Resale ECs, right, they tend to sell very, very closely in price to private condo, and the gap is usually about 100 over per square foot. So when an EC owner exits, right, they're exiting at almost a private market level. But when they first bought their EC, right, they enter at a market which is about 700 per square foot lower than the private condos around them. And this is definitely the built-in advantage of the EC model. Because you enter at a lower starting point, right, and when it's time to sell, your price naturally gravitates towards the private market. That buy low and sell near private spread is what consistently helped EC owners lock in strong profits over the years. Now, I'm not saying that every EC will automatically make like $1 million, but what this chart actually shows is the potential that some EC owners have achieved. And the reason is actually very, very clear, because EC is actually a restricted product. Like, not everybody can buy it. You'll need to meet like HDB eligibility, income ceiling, family nucleus, and all that. And once you actually clear those requirements, right, and you buy in, you're essentially getting access to private level living at a much lower entry price. And when you eventually sell after MOP, right, you are no longer selling just an EC. You are selling into the private market. And that is why many of these ECs, right, end up transacting very, very close to private condo prices, and that's where the profit comes in. Because you bought in low due to the initial subsidies, you get to sell near private levels because the market views this as a full condo by then, and that built-in price gap has allowed some EC owners to walk away with 6 or even 7-figure gains. And here is the same comparison for the 4-bedroom segment. If you look at the OCR region, right, the average price gap for a 4-bedder new launch private versus a new EC 4-bedder is actually at 1.01 million. So for families, right, who are looking at larger layouts, the difference becomes even more significant. You're essentially entering the market at a price point that is over $1 million lower, that is equivalent to private new launch. And this is where EC really stands out, especially for bigger units. You get the space, facilities, and the long-term upside, but you're also starting from a much more comfortable and manageable entry point. One of the common concerns that I hear, right, is that actually ECs are worth buying 5 years ago. But because today the prices have already gone up so much, right, is it still worth it? So let's look at the actual numbers, right? If we actually compare private new condos to private new ECs back in 2019 to 2022 range, right, actually the price gap back then was between $200 to $400 per square foot. And fast forward to today, the gap has actually widened all the way up to $600 to $800 per square foot. So the key question here is, would you feel safer entering the market when the gap is small or when the gap is bigger? Because actually when the gap is bigger, right, you are getting a more prudent entry. You are buying at a much lower price in relation to the private market, which actually gives you more downside protection, a clearer margin to catch up, because you have such a wide gap, a stronger capital potential over time. And this is why, although EC prices have already gone up, right, the relative value compared to private condo has actually improved. And a wider gap, right, will essentially mean that you're entering from a safer position, and this is what this slide is actually showing. So at this point, you might be wondering, EC seems to offer such a big price advantage. But how is it that new EC prices can still be kept relatively low? It comes down to how EC framework is designed. ECs are not priced the same way as private condos. Developers still bid for the land, but they bid under a different structure. And there are certain restrictions and eligibility rules that keep demand more controlled. And because the buyer pool is actually very limited, developers cannot price the ECs the same way as private condos. They have to launch at a more reasonable quantum. Otherwise, they will risk missing their target audience. So the end result is this, right? You're getting a product that looks feels and functions exactly like a private condo, but you get to enter the market at a much manageable level. And that's the foundation of why ECs can remain attractively priced even in today's market. So just like BTOs, right, are a reserved housing type for Singaporeans with certain requirements, EC also work the same way, just in a slightly different tier. Both BTOs and new ECs will come with eligibility rules. Number one, definitely not everyone will qualify, and that is very, very intentional. Because of these requirements, right, demand is naturally controlled. So when the demand is controlled, right, prices have to be restrained as well. Developers cannot just price EC however they want. The product has to remain accessible for the group that it's meant for. And on top of that, there are subsidies provided that is built into the EC framework, which is why the entry price is always noticeably lower as compared to private condos. So even though ECs look and function like a private condo, they are priced at a subsidy, so that creates a value advantage. So these are actually the main requirements that you need to think about if you are thinking to buy a new EC. Number one, it will be your income ceiling. Your combined household income has to be $16,000 or below, and this is one of the biggest filters, right? It is also a key to why EC stays moderate, because not everybody qualifies. Next, you definitely have to form a family nucleus, so you can't buy EC as a single person. You will need to apply it as a couple or with immediate family. For citizenship, right, at least one applicant needs to be Singapore citizen. The other can be either a Singapore citizen or permanent residents. In terms of ownership, you cannot currently own of any private property, and you cannot have disposed one in the last 30 months. And if you are letting go of a BTO, you will need to satisfy 1 year wait out period. You can apply as a first or second timer, but of course your grants and priority will differ. And lastly, these loans for EC, right, they follow a MSR framework at 30%, which is definitely more conservative than private condos. And all these requirements may feel quite restrictive, but they are exactly what is needed to keep EC prices fair, which is why eligible buyers get such a strong value. So with all that in mind, right, the next question is, where is the real opportunity to buy EC today? Because timing and location does matter, right? And not every EC launch will give you the same advantage. So now let's take a look at the Pasir Ris EC specifically. It's been 13 years since the last EC launch in this area, and 13 years is definitely a very long time ago, especially for a mature town, and this Pasir Ris EC is the nearest to amenities because most of the EC supplies, right, in the past have been concentrated in the west and north over the last decade, which means buyers in the east had very, very few opportunities. And if you really want an EC here, right, basically you just had to wait. And that is what makes Coastal Cabana such a standout moment, right? Because it's filling a supply gap that has been empty for more than a decade. And that naturally creates pent-up demand from families who have been holding up for an Eastern EC option. So Coastal Cabana will have access to 2 MRT lines, the existing Pasir Ris MRT and eventually the Cross Island Line Pasir Ris East MRT. This project is expected to TOP in the year 2028, which is the year that you will be expected to collect your keys, and during the MOP will be 2033. And here is the interesting part, right? Actually, when you finish your MOP and when you're allowed to sell on the resale market, right, this Cross Island line will already be up and running. So future buyers, right, won't be looking at just the Pasir Ris MRT. They will definitely be looking at a more connected dual line location, which is what most ECs don't get to enjoy when they actually hit the resale market. And this definitely strengthens the long-term appeal. So here is actually an overview of all the ECs that have launched since 1996, right? And all 80 existing projects plus the 7 upcoming ones. Something interesting actually pops up, right? Out of all these ECs, only 3 of them are actually walkable to the beach. Obviously, all of them are in Pasir Ris, and Coastal Cabana is one of them. So why does this matter? Because the EC demographic is actually largely made up of families and children. And in today's world, right, kids are mostly stuck to the screens. Having a beachfront park just a few minutes away gives them something different, a space to play explore, or just be outdoors, right? So Coastal Cabana is just about 5 minutes walk to Pasir Ris Beach, and that is a lifestyle advantage that you simply don't see in most of the ECs. And on top of that, it is also one of the very rare ECs that sits extremely close to a mall. So basically, eHub is actually right next door. So daily convenience like your groceries, food options, enrichment class, or even a movie theatre, right, is actually right at your doorstep. So beachfront living plus mall convenience, and this is almost unheard of in the EC category. This is what makes Coastal Cabana stand out in this lineup. Now, while lifestyle and amenities are great, right, we cannot buy property purely based on that. We still need to use numbers to back up whether this is a sound and protected purchase. Because at the end of the day, we want to buy with safety and with logic and with data. We want an entry price that gives us protection on the downside and in the future resale market. So the real question here is, how do we buy at a protected entry price? What are the factors that we need to look at to make sure that we are entering at the right level? And that is what we are going to break down next. So if we zoom into District 17 and District 18, this chart shows the price trend between the new ECs and the new condos in District 17 and District 18. And what is interesting is that the price gap today has actually gone back to 2022 levels. And that is actually a good thing, right? Just now, like I mentioned, when the price gap actually widens, it gives us a renewed opportunity to enter at a safer and more prudent price point. You are buying in much lower, which means you are essentially buying with built-in protection. And that's the whole idea behind ECs. A bigger price gap will let you buy into profit and gives you downside protection and positions you for a better long-term upside. So for 2025, right, with the gap opening up again, buyers get another chance to enter at a protected entry price, especially in the east side of Singapore. And if we zoom into the 3-bedroom segment, for District 17 and 18, just purely the 3-bedroom, you can see that again the price gap has actually widened again in the recent years. And right now the price difference between the new private 3-bedder and a new EC 3-bedder sits at about $869,000. And this is again why buying into price gap matters. Like we actually talked about earlier, when the price gap widens, you get more protection. Because you're starting at almost 900,000 lower than the private condo market. And this kind of gap doesn't happen all the time, right? Especially in the East. So when it does, right, it becomes a window of opportunity for EC buyers. And this same pattern actually shows up in the 4-bedroom segment in District 17 and 18 as well. So in the past, the price gap between new ECs and new private condos was actually a lot narrower, just like the 3-bedroom segment. But today, the price gap has actually widened significantly again. Right now, the difference sits around $1.17 million. So just now, like we discussed, right, the bigger price gap, it gives you a more prudent entry and a clearer path to buy into profit, especially for larger units, right? This gap becomes a bit more meaningful because you're entering at more than $1 million lower than the private market. And this is why ECs continue to be one of the most protected entry points for families looking for 4-bedders in the East. So how do we make sure that we are not overpaying? I mean, one key thing is that we always need to check developers' land bid price. Over the years, right, EC land price have been steadily rising, and that is no strange news to everybody. And this is important because when developers pay more for land, right, they naturally have to launch at a higher price to maintain the margins. So understanding the land bids, right, actually give us a clearer picture of whether the launch price actually makes sense or whether it's being pushed beyond fundamentals, because the land price actually sets a foundation. And when we look at it, right, we can assess whether the EC is actually priced fairly or not. And next, we look at about income ceiling and affordability because this definitely has a direct impact on EC prices and land bids. Because if we look at the past trend, right, the income ceiling typically gets adjusted during National Day rally and general election years, basically. And back in 2011, the ceiling was raised to $12,000. And back then, an average 4-bedroom price was $944,000. And the loan required for 944,000 unit was $755,000. So for a 35-year-old couple earning $12,000, they can definitely max out their loan with no top-up or no shortfall for their loan. And in 2015, income ceiling has actually increased to $14,000. And back then, the average 4-bedroom price is about $1 million. And for $1 million, the loan required is $800,000. And for a 35-year-old couple that earns $14,000 per month, their maximum loan is actually $880,000. So basically, there is no loan shortfall from 2011 to 2015. But in 2020, right, when the ceiling actually went up to $16,000, the prices have already moved. And the average 4-bedroom EC is actually at $1.4 million. And the loan required will be actually at $1.12 million. And a 35-year-old couple earning $16,000 can only borrow up to $1 million, which means that there is a shortfall of $120,000. So fast forward to this year, the average 4-bedroom EC now sits at $1.95 million. And the estimated loan for $1.95 million is $1.46 million. And the maximum loan is still based on $16,000 household income, which is $1 million. And that is a shortfall of $460,000. So the affordability has started to stretch, right? And the income ceiling has not changed yet. And given the historical pattern where income ceilings tend to be adjusted every few years, often during National Day rally or general election periods. So the question now here is, are we due for another income ceiling increase? And if that happens, right, developers may start bidding higher for future land, which could push EC prices up again. And this is something that came out quite recently, right? In 2015, the Business Times reported that the government is actually reviewing the public housing income ceiling. Now, historically, whenever the HDB income ceiling is raised, right, the EC income ceiling will usually move in tandem because both markets are meant to stay accessible to the same group of Singaporean families. So if, let's say, HDB actually raises their ceiling, it is very likely that the EC ceiling will also be reviewed as well. And why does this matter to you? Because once that ceiling goes up, right, more households suddenly qualify, the demand will expand, the developers will feel more confident to bid higher for future EC lands, which then pushes EC prices up in the next cycle. So for buyers entering the market now, before any changes is announced, this could potentially be the last window where ECs are still priced based on the current $16,000 ceiling. And this is the EC supply situation in Singapore today across the entire island. I think as of now, there are only 20 units left for sale. And they are all from one project, or else everything is sold out. So actually, if you think it from a developer's perspective, right, when you see that the whole EC market has only 20 units left and every launch gets absorbed so quickly, would you feel confident to bid higher or lower for the next EC plot? Because most developers would naturally bid higher because the demand is proven, supply is tight, and EC consistently sells out. And this is why absorption rate matters the most, right? A strong EC market today usually leads to higher land bids tomorrow, which then means higher EC prices in the next cycle. And these are the upcoming land plots for ECs. You can see an immediate difference. Most of the future sites are launched later, but they are further from malls and they are also not near the beach, definitely. And land cost is generally a bit higher, except for Sembawang EC. And but for Sembawang EC, it's nowhere near the lifestyle or convenience factors that you get in Pasir Ris. So naturally, their launch prices are going to be looking a little bit different from Coastal Cabana. Different land costs, different location, different amenities. Here is where it gets interesting, right? If the government decides to increase the income ceiling, that means more households suddenly qualify to buy an EC. And when the eligibility expands, right, developers get more confident, which usually leads to higher land bids for future site. So if that is the scenario, right, a project like Pasir Ris EC with the beach nearby, next to a mall at okay land cost, which makes it quite attractive, right? You're essentially buying into the last EC at this price tier before the next round of land costs and ceiling adjustments push the prices again. So let's break it down what counts as a first-timer and second-timer, because this will definitely affect your eligibility and priority. So first timer is actually essentially someone who has never received any form of housing subsidy, and that means no CPF housing grants, and you have not received BTO subsidies, and you have not received other subsidies like CERS as well. So in short, right, this is your very first time tapping into any government housing support. And for the second timer, on the other hand, it's someone who have received a housing subsidy in the past. So if you've taken a BTO before, or you've taken a CPF grant, or received any subsidized housing benefit, you definitely fall into the second timer category. And for second timers, you may also need to pay a resale levy depending on what you actually bought previously. So this distinction matters because priority during booking, grants eligibility, and even the competition level can differ between the first timers and the second timers. So the next question here is, right, can HDB upgraders really afford to buy a new EC today? And when we look at the recent EC launches, an average 3-bedroom price gives us quite a good reference. For Rivelle at Tampines, it is around $1.55 million. At Auto Place, it is about $1.62 million. So let's set a realistic example, right? If we use $1.6 million as a purchase price for an average 3-bedder EC, which is based on the last 2 launches, and we look at a couple who is earning $16,000, this is what their numbers will look like. Under the MSR, which is actually 30%, the installment is capped at $4,800 a month. And with that limit, right, their maximum loan works out to be slightly above $1 million. But for a $1.6 million purchase, right, 75% loan will equate to $1.2 million. So definitely it means that there's a shortfall of roughly about $195,000. So the question becomes, right, if this is the unit you want and the numbers look like this, how are you going to make up for this shortfall? What are the options available to bridge this gap so that 1.6 million EC is still achievable? And this is where EC really stands out, right? Because they actually have this thing called Deferred Payment Scheme, or DPS. And ECs are the only new launch product that still offers DPS, and it makes a huge difference for buyers who want to avoid dual monthly repayments while their new home is being built. On the left, right, we actually have the normal progressive payment scheme, and you basically pay 25% down payment as your construction progresses, the bank will actually disperse the loan accordingly, and your mortgage actually starts once the foundation is done, which is usually typically around 6 to 9 months. But for deferred payment scheme, right, things work a little bit differently. You only pay 20% down payment, and you do not pay any mortgage at all during the construction years. So no installments for about estimate 3 years. And your first mortgage only starts during TOP stage when you collect your keys, and 60% of your loan will be dispersed together with the remaining 5% as your down payment. So actually the benefits are quite clear. Number one, there's no dual commitment. You don't have to pay installment for your current HDB and your new EC at the same time. And you can continue staying in your HDB. You will only need to sell after you collect your keys. And you can definitely save on 3 years of interest. However, there's one thing to note, right? For deferred payment scheme, right, they actually come at a 3 to 4% premium over the normal progressive payment scheme. And that is a trade-off. You're basically paying slightly more for the flexibility and the cash flow relief. For many upgrader families, the additional 3 to 4% is actually worth it because it removes the stress of 2 mortgages and it gives them a smoother transition into their new EC. So let me put it into a real life scenario, right? You can meet Andy and Michelle. Both of them are 35 years old, earning a combined income of $16,000. And they currently own a HDB flat that is worth about $800,000. And they want to actually upgrade to a 3-bedroom EC under the deferred payment scheme. So if the EC is actually priced at $1.6 million under the normal payment scheme, a deferred payment scheme would roughly price around $1.648 million, which is actually 3% more expensive. So for $1.648 million, for a 75% loan, they will require $1.236 million. But based on MSR and their income, their eligible loan is only maximum at $1 million, which means that they are facing a shortfall of $230,000. And this is the exact same issue that many upgraders couple face. Not that they cannot afford the monthly installments after TOP, but because of the MSR cap ratio, right, it limits how much you can borrow upfront. So the question here is, how do Andy and Michelle bridge this $230,000 while still using BPS and avoid dual mortgage payments? So here is how they actually solve the loan shortfall. Because they currently own a HDB that is worth about $800,000 and their outstanding loan is around $200,000. And with this thing called deferred bridging loan, the bank calculates how much they can borrow based off 90% of the HDB value, which is 90% of 800,000, and they less off the outstanding of 200,000. So that will work out to be about 520,000. This is the maximum amount of bridging loan they can get. And since their loan shortfall of EC is only 230,000, the bridging loan definitely covers more than enough of what they need. And even though the MSR limits their upfront loan, the deferred bridging loan gives them the flexibility to go ahead with this purchase without selling the HDB or commit to 2 mortgages at the same time. So now another important way to look at this is that instead of asking, right, can Andy and Michelle afford the EC, we can flip the question and ask, what is the maximum purchase price they can go for with this bridging loan? So we take their original loan eligibility of $1 million, right? And we add on the deferred bridging loan maximum of $520,000. That gives them the combined financing capacity to $1.525 million. And because the bridging loan can cover up to 80% of the purchase price, this would mean that their maximum property price over here would work out to be $1.906 million. So even though initially, right, they are only looking at a 3-bedder of 1.6 million, which will look a bit tight at first, but once you factor in the deferred bridging loan, right, they actually have more room and more potential units to even choose from, as long as they are still comfortable with the 20% down payment portion. So if you want a tailored access of your own situation, or if you're curious to find out how much you can qualify for, you can reach out to me and I can run the numbers for your exact scenario. And I know some of you are probably thinking, right, since there are 2 ECs coming up in the East, should you wait for the Tampines one instead? And ECs in the East have always have crazy demand, right? We saw it with Tenet, which sold 93.2%, and definitely we see it at Aura at Tampines again, both of them moving more than 90% of their units almost immediately. But instead of just saying like it sold well, I think it's more meaningful to look at the numbers behind it. Actually, how many people managed to secure a unit at Aura? So for L'Oreal, right, they had 1,771 families who applied, but only 760 units were available, which means that, right, only 42% of people managed to buy, and 58% of them, which is more than 1,000 families, walked away with nothing. And when you think of it, right, that is roughly 4 in 10 chance that you are able to get a unit. So if you're planning to wait out for the Tampines EC instead of considering Coastal Cabana now, the real question becomes, what is your backup plan if your ballot number doesn't land in your favor? Because the demand definitely shows, right? Not everyone who wants an EC in the East actually gets one. So now let's move on to some of the details of Coastal Cabana itself. So this project lies along Jalan Loyang Besar. It is a 748 unit, which is spread across 11 and 12-story blocks. It is definitely a full facility EC with pool, tennis court, clubhouse, everything you expect from a modern development. TOP is expected to be about 2029, which lines up nicely for families planning for their next home move or long-term upgrade path. And what is really interesting here is the land size, right? The land size is actually 28,000 square meters. That is a generous plot for a 748 units EC, which usually means more breathing room, better spacing, and facilities doesn't feel too crowded. And for families who drive, right, good news, Coastal Cabana comes with 1-to-1 parking lots, and that includes EV accessible lots. So every household definitely will get a space. It is these small details that makes everyday living more convenient. And when it comes to location, Coastal Cabana is honestly in a very comfortable spot. You are one traffic light away, right, to everything in the downtown east area, which means that everything you need day to day is quite sorted. You have your groceries, fair price, Donkey. For food, you have like Texas Chicken, McDonald's, KFC, Ashton's Tan Yu. And for shoppings and essentials, you have Dyson, Watsons, and the list really goes on, right? And downtown east is practically a playground. You have Wild Wild Wet, you have Tayo Station, and you also have karaoke spots, Darts Arcade. It's basically a full lifestyle hub for both adults and kids. So in terms of convenience, right, you don't really just get a home, you really get a whole ecosystem right next door. For families with school-going children, the location actually gets better. Within 1 kilometer, you have quite a few options. You have Hastings Catholic, Casuarina Primary, and even Pasir Ris Crest Secondary is actually a short drive away. And these are schools that many parents already recognize and actively look out for. I mean, for the older kids or for future planning, right, that you are only just a few MRT stops to major tertiary institutions like SUTD and also SIT. So for the entire educational pipeline, right, from primary all the way to university level, it's quite well covered. It's really one of the locations where you don't have to worry about accessibility for your kids as they grow up. Now, looking at the site plan, right, the layout is actually quite thoughtfully done. There are 16 blocks over here, and all of them are actually point block, which means there are only 4 units per floor, which means that there's better ventilation, more privacy, and generally a more comfortable living environment. And the whole development is also oriented north-south facing, so definitely you'll avoid strong west sun. You'll get softer, more consistent natural light throughout the day. And for those who love a view, these stacks that are facing Jalan Loyang Besar will have a potential for sea-facing units, which is extremely rare for an EC. And you also realize, right, there's a lot of facilities packed into this development. Pools, garden, lounges, club spaces, and everything is quite comprehensive. I won't be going through every single one of it here, but if you want the full brochure or detailed breakdown, you can just DM me and I'll send it over. So Coastal Cabanas, this is the unit mix, and it is very family oriented, definitely. And you can see from the distribution, 47% of it is made out of 3-bedroom units, which is exactly what most upgrader families are looking for. And then you have 27% of it for the standard 4-bedroom layouts, and another 15% in the larger 4-bedroom units. These are great for multi-gen living or families who simply want more room. And there's also a handful of 5-bedroom premium units, which work out to be about 3% of the project. So if you're eyeing for bigger layouts, these will be very limited. Maintenance fees are quite straightforward. Most of the 3 and 4-bedder stacks fall under $330 to $385 per month. So for an EC of this scale, full facilities and large land area, these fees are actually very reasonable. And if you want help to narrowing down which layout suits your family best, you can just reach out and I'll walk you through all your different options. And this is the elevation chart for Coastal Cabana. If you want, you can zoom in, compare stacks, or look at specific levels in detail. You can feel free to screenshot this, or you can DM me and I'll send you a clearer copy. Now let's look through the floor plans. Let's start from the 3 bedrooms. We will start with the smallest 3-bedder layout of 872 square feet. So this comes in 2 versions, the C1A and the C1B. Both of them are exactly the same size, and they are quite similar in terms of layout as well. The main difference is actually in the orientation and the placement of the aircon latch, which doesn't really affect your internal space because this is non-strata. Functionally, these are very effective 3-bedroom layouts, and you still get a proper living and dining space, a decent balcony, and all the rooms can fit a queen bed. And the master is also quite generous in size. You still also get a yard and household shelter, which is quite rare for anything below 900 square feet today. On the bottom here, you'll see the estimated price matrix that I have done across all floor ranges. The cheapest units here will start about $1.438 million, and the higher floors can potentially go up to maybe $1.7 million, depending on your stack and view. So if you're targeting this category entry, right, this series will definitely be the most achievable option. So now we move on to the 915 square feet layouts. It comes in two formats, the 3-bedroom premium C2 and the 3-bedroom premium plus study of C3. On paper, both of them are the same size, but the internal layout is a bit different. For the 3-bedroom premium, you get a small study corner, and you get an additional WC, which is next to the yard and home shelter, which is quite useful if you are a family who wants this extra washroom, especially for those who actually have a helper. But for the premium plus study, right, instead of getting a study corner, you really get a full-size study room. And the nice thing is, right, if let's say you actually enclose it up here, you actually can change this to like your walk-in wardrobe or even a small work from home office station with proper privacy. But of course, the drawback is that you don't get the WC like the C2 layout. So even though these two, the size is the same, right, the flexibility is quite different already. But generally, the efficiency is still really good. You have a proper yard, home shelter, and 3 good-sized bedrooms. Like the earlier type, you also still get a proper sized living and dining area and also a balcony. So moving on to the 4 bedrooms, right? Let's look at the 4 bedroom option, which I think that will appeal to bigger families or those who want extra room for flexibility. You get 2 types here, which is the classic and the deluxe. The classic is 990 square feet and the deluxe is 1012 square feet. So between these two, right, the real key difference is really bedroom 4. So for the classic series, bedroom 4 is actually much smaller. It basically fits a single bed. I think it will work better as a study or a hobby room. But in the 4-bedroom deluxe, bedroom 4 is noticeably larger. You can fit a queen bed, which makes it usable as a proper bedroom for an adult or a child. Everything else in the layout essentially is the same. It's just that if you really need 4 usable bedrooms, then the deluxe will definitely make more sense. Or if you actually just want the extra room for occasional needs or use as a study, maybe the classic have already met your needs and that is something you can potentially go for. And now we move on to the 4-bedroom premium. And the 4-bedroom premium plus study series. And this is where the space really starts to feel a little bit different. The D3 layout is 1055 square feet, is the more compact one. It still gives you 4 proper bedrooms, but the living room over here is 30 square meters, which is larger than the earlier smaller size classic and deluxe layout where it is 26 square meters. However, there will not be any study or walk-in wardrobe. However, for the 4-bedroom premium plus study D4 layout, 1,163 square feet, the difference is quite noticeable. You get a bigger living and dining area, 33 square meters, and even a proper study of 4 square meters, and even a walk-in wardrobe for the master bedroom. So for families who need both work from home spaces and storage, I think this layout will definitely check the boxes quite nicely. Now we move on to D4 and D5. The 4-bedroom plus study D4 layout, which is 1,216 square feet, and the D5 layout of 1,206 square feet. The feel of the space is actually quite different, although the size is quite close. Because for the D4 layout, right, the main difference is that there is an additional balcony in the master bedroom. While some people love having this extra outdoor space for morning coffee or just more ventilation, I think others, and including myself, I would prefer to skip this extra balcony. So I think it really comes down to the preference whether outdoor corner is something that you really enjoy and use. D5, on the other hand, really has a very nice living and dining width. If you look at the plan, right, the entire common area feels more open, and the layout naturally allows for a flexi room, which is great if you want to carve out a helper's room or study or even storage space. And the kitchen is also slightly larger, and I definitely have a preference for this D5 layout. And lastly, we have the 5-bedroom segments. So for the 5-bedroom, right, we are already in a very spacious zone, especially in the living and dining areas, which really feels like a proper family hub. And the difference really comes down to the balcony for this E1 and E2 layout. For this E2 layout, right, the balcony is a lot wider and it actually stretches all the way to bedroom 4. So if you are someone who actually likes extended outdoor area, maybe for a longer dining setup, or maybe you have plants or just a nice view line, this will give you the extra versatility. However, I think the rest of the layout is exactly the same. So if you really want to keep the price lower, I think E1 would be my pick. The space is already more than sufficient for a 5-bedroom. Unless you really value the extended balcony, E1 will give you everything that you need without paying more for something that you might not fully use. So here's a quick look at the launch timeline. You will know what to exactly expect. From 6th to 21st December, you will get to preview the show flat and submit your e-application. And then after that, HDB will issue your e-app and your LOA, which is what you need before you can buy. Your queue number will be announced on estimated 13 January and followed by price release on the 14th and 15th January. And this will give you a bit of time to shortlist your ideal stacks and get your numbers ready. And booking day will be on 17 January where you finally get to pick your unit. And once that is done, HDB approval will happen in the background. And after that, the developer will issue the sale and purchase agreement. It's quite a straightforward process, but the key here is getting prepared for your queue number when it comes out, because that is where usually buyers rush in. And if you need help planning or narrowing the choices early, you can just reach out. So that's everything for now. If you have found this useful, remember to like the video and subscribe. It really helps more people to discover these breakdowns. And if you want early alerts, bounce out units or time-sensitive updates that I don't always share publicly, you can just join my Telegram channel. The QR code is right there. Or if you prefer a chat or want me to run your numbers on your specific situation, you can always reach out to me at the number below. And thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.